Hello and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to another episode of NCERT International Relations. Today we are going to discuss one of the most consequential topics. We will talk about India's nuclear policy. We will explore the evolution of India's nuclear program, both the civilian program and the nuclear weapons program. Because this is not just about India's scientific achievement. This was more of a diplomatic achievement to overcome the geopolitical challenges that were creating a hurdle for India's nuclear journey. So, this topic is extremely crucial for international relations and as well as for security. So, let's explore this topic in detail. But before that, let me wish all the UPSC aspirants who are appearing for the mains exam tomorrow all the very best. Ensure that you stay calm and you focus on your preparation. Just focus on your answer writing. Read the questions carefully. And I really wish all of you who are appearing from tomorrow all the very best to deliver the best possible attempt. And please note that we'll also be conducting a detailed paper analysis starting from tomorrow. And here's the schedule for you. Starting from tomorrow, we will be covering all the papers essay, GS1, 2, 3, and 4, including ethics. So from 21st August to 24th August, at these times, we will be covering all the question papers of the mains exam and providing a detailed paper analysis with the model answers. So do ensure you attend these sessions live and please ensure that you let us know whether you're giving the mains exam this time or not in the comment section below. So coming to our discussion, today is class number 8 for NCERT International Relations, where we are talking about India's nuclear policy. So, what exactly are we going to discuss over the next 1.5 hours? See, when you look at the class 12 textbook on politics in India since independence, there is a brief mention of India's nuclear policy in chapter number 4. There are few other related chapters where India's nuclear program has been mentioned. But what is provided in the NCERT books is simply not enough to understand India's nuclear policy. So today, I'll take you beyond the NCERT textbooks by using this as a reference, as a basis. And we will talk about the entire journey of India's nuclear program, starting right from 1947 to the key decisions that were taken in 1950s, 60s, and 70s. What paved the way for India eventually to test nuclear weapons, not once, but twice? What were the global circumstances? What kind of diplomatic, geopolitical challenges did India have to face? What were the scientific hurdles that we had to overcome? And we will look at the key milestones, the key leaders and the decision makers who played a pivotal role in our nuclear program, and talk about India emerging as a nuclear weapon state. We will talk about the nuclear doctrine that India has put in place, the nuclear command structure which has been established, and how India has today entered the global mainstream of nuclear technology. How we managed to overcome the global isolation and the sanctions, and how we have distinguished our program from Pakistan's rogue nuclear program. These are the key topics that we are going to discuss today. And as you know, as part of the NCERT series, every Thursday and Friday we are conducting a free quiz on these topics at 3 p.m. on the Unacademy app. These quiz sessions are being conducted to help you revise these topics and to test your preparedness. So just scan the QR code on your screen and you can access all these sessions which are lined up till the 31st of August. And as we end this program on the 31st of August, we will conduct a mega quiz from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. on the Unacademy app. This will not only help you to attempt 50 practice questions, which are of UPSC Prelims standard, it will also ensure that the top performers are rewarded. The best performers will stand a chance to get 20% flat additional discount on Unacademy Platinum subscription. So to enroll for the mega quiz, just scan the QR code on your screen. And if you want the PDF of the session, scan this QR code. I'll be sharing the PDF of today's session by tomorrow. So with this, let's begin with our discussion. First, let me take you through the timeline of India's nuclear program. We will classify it under different prime ministers and we will develop a broad outlook as to what was the policy priority during these periods. Based on that, we will take up a detailed assessment, a thorough assessment of India's nuclear decisions that were taken and how it helped India to emerge out of the shadows how it helped India to emerge out of this global isolation that had been imposed on India. So, India's nuclear journey goes all the way back to post independent India, starting right from 1947-48, when Prime Minister Nehru laid the initial foundation of India's nuclear program. But Prime Minister Nehru was firmly against the development of nuclear weapons, though he supported the development of nuclear technology for peaceful purposes. He was also an advocate for nuclear disarmament. So, this was an era where India had laid the foundation for a nuclear research program focusing just on civilian technology. But India was staying away from pursuing weapons technology. So, was this the right decision? That is something we will evaluate because Prime Minister Nehru is often criticized for being short sighted in this regard. So, we will carry out an unbiased assessment of the policies of Prime Minister Nehru. Then we will look at the 60s and 70s, probably the most difficult period for India, under Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri and then under Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. We will talk about India's first ever nuclear test at Pokhran and the consequences arising out of it, and how India navigated the global sanctions regime throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s under Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, PV Narasimha Rao, and the others. Then we will talk about the Vajpayee era, the turning point where India carried out massive nuclear tests in underground facilities at Pokhran in 1998, firmly establishing India as a nuclear weapon state, and how India dealt with the aftermath, how India dealt with the global reaction and the consequences, how Prime Minister Manmohan Singh streamlined India's nuclear program into the global mainstream, how Prime Minister Manmohan Singh brought India out of that nuclear isolation, and how India transformed itself as a responsible nuclear state. And we will look at the current ongoing policy changes under the Modi government as well. So, as I said, this will be a detailed, comprehensive discussion going way beyond your NCERT books. So, first, let's understand why did India pursue nuclear technology in the first place? This in itself can be asked as a 10-mark mains question. See, there are three important reasons why India believed in nuclear technology from the very beginning. One, of course, was the objective of national development. Prime Minister Nehru was a strong believer in scientific temper. He was a very strong advocate for scientific development and research. So, along with leading pioneers like Homi Jahangir Baba, Prime Minister Nehru advocated a push for nuclear research, but focusing just on civilian technology. Because India back then was facing a critical shortage of coal, oil, electricity. That's a challenge we face even today. Being an energy deficient country with very limited hydrocarbon reserves, it was essential for India to focus on energy independence. To protect its strategic autonomy, it was important to achieve self reliance, and nuclear technology could provide that opportunity for India, for nation building, for economic development, to achieve that economic resilience where you don't have to depend on imported coal, imported oil, and gas and meet your electricity requirements. And of course, it was about technological modernization. Back in 1940s and 50s, nuclear technology was seen as the cutting edge of science and technology. As the world had just witnessed the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the world was witnessing the nuclear transformation and the arms race that had taken off, it became essential for India to pursue the path in the interest of scientific modernity, in the interest of maintaining our self reliance and protecting our strategic autonomy in our foreign policy. Because it had become very evident that nuclear technology could be potentially used by major powers to blackmail those non nuclear states which had rivalries and enmity with the nuclear weapon states. So, protecting our independence, protecting our autonomy became very crucial, especially after 1962, after the India China War, which we have covered in our last week's classes. So, these three objectives drove India's nuclear foreign policy. So, essentially, the philosophy was technology first, that is, the civilian technology focusing on nuclear research, on essentially nuclear power, and then nuclear weapons if required, if the need arises, if the strategic necessity is present, then diverting the civilian program towards nuclear weapons program. So this ambiguity that we maintain, the strategic ambiguity, that has been a defining characteristic of India's nuclear foreign policy. For several decades, India kept taking two positions at the same time. On one side, we were pushing for nuclear disarmament, calling for a nuclear weapon free world. At the same time, India started accelerating its weapons program, even diverting civilian technology towards the weapons program. We even used our imported nuclear material and technology from US and Canada to reverse engineer the technology and to divert the same technology towards our weapons program. So this was clearly an ambiguous position. It was a deliberate ambiguity that was maintained as a strategic choice. So we will try to dissect all these key decisions that were taken under different prime ministers, starting with Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. As I said, this is where India's nuclear foundation was laid. By 1948, India had initiated a nuclear research program under the leadership of Homi Bhabha. Prime Minister Nehru shared a great equation with the charismatic Homi Jahangir Bhabha. As I said, PM Nehru placed immense faith in science and technology. He was a firm believer in scientific advancement. You get to see that in India's industrialization plans, in our 5-year plans as well. So when you look at the 5-year plans and the industrialization plans of India, nuclear research sector was prioritized by the Nehru government. But Prime Minister Nehru placed one restriction. He went against the recommendations of Homi Bhabha and the strategic establishment to basically take a stand against nuclear weapons development. Because at that point, Prime Minister Nehru, who was seen as a statesman, India, which was seen as a leading non-violent power, was taking a principled stand in global geopolitics. The world had just emerged out of Second World War. The first ever nuclear bombing had taken place. The atrocities, the human tragedy had been seen and experienced. So India was the last country which wanted to contribute to this nuclear arms race which had been triggered. So a very careful, conscious decision was made to not pursue nuclear weapons at that point. Given that India did not face any immediate nuclear armed threat, a well thought out decision was made to not pursue the path of weapons but focus on nuclear research and civilian technology. It was in this regard that Canada and US began assisting India's nuclear research program. Canada even supplied India's first ever nuclear reactor, with US supplying the nuclear material and working with Indian scientists led by Homi Bhabha. So this was Prime Minister Nehru's biggest contribution, the establishment of the industrial scientific base, the setting up of key institutions and departments such as the Atomic Energy Commission, the Department of Atomic Energy, etc. So parallelly, two distinct policies were being pursued. One focusing on nuclear disarmament, where Prime Minister Nehru was championing the cause for equitable disarmament, a transparent, free and fair disarmament, so that the world gets rid of nuclear weapons. India raised this voice at the United Nations as well, urging US, Soviet Union, and other nuclear states to give up their nuclear arsenal, while parallelly, India pursued its own indigenous civilian nuclear program. So since India had taken this strong opposition against nuclear arms race, it became essential for India to live up to that commitment, to live up to that ideal. That's why India's initial nuclear program focused extensively on civilian research, not on the military phase of the program. But then, if you look at the contribution of Prime Minister Nehru with regard to India's pursuit of nuclear technology, the establishment of Atomic Energy Commission in 1948 with the Department of Atomic Energy in 1954, this created the institutional architecture that was required. In fact, the Department of Atomic Energy, which was set up directly under the Prime Minister, went on to play a pivotal role over the decades. Even today, the department continues to function under the Prime Minister's office, reporting directly to the Prime Minister. Now, when you look at the contribution of Homi Jahangir Bhabha, this is something which has to be stressed upon. If Prime Minister Nehru laid the political vision that India will pursue global nuclear disarmament, at the same time, we will pursue civilian nuclear technology in India and nuclear research in India. So that was the political vision of Nehru. So to support this, Homi Bhabha laid the technological architecture. though Homi Bhabha was a firm believer that India should develop nuclear weapons to deter the nuclear states, primarily China, which had already started pursuing its nuclear weapons program. Though Nehru and Homi Bhabha were in disagreement, eventually Homi Bhabha aligned with Nehru's goal and vision and laid the technological architecture on which our nuclear program is today built upon. So there are three important contributions of Homi Bhabha that you must be aware of. First and foremost, the institutionalization, the establishment of the initial institutions that laid the foundation of this program. Institutes like TIFR, the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, in 1945, Atomic Energy Commission, established by Prime Minister Nehru, which was led by Homi Bhabha. Then Atomic Energy Establishment at Trombay, which later became the BARC, the Bhabha Atomic Research Center, named after Homi Bhabha for his immense contribution to India's nuclear program. He went on to establish the concept of indigenous development and self-reliance in nuclear technology. Homi Bhabha was someone who clearly understood the importance of focusing on the entire fuel cycle and the entire nuclear supply chain. He realized very quickly that building just few reactors or procuring material from others and implementing foreign technology in India was not enough. Achieving self reliance would be critical to India's long term plans. So, Homi Bhabha's vision and the institutional architecture he set up in 1950s was built upon establishing the entire end-to-end nuclear fuel cycle in India, starting right from uranium mining to processing and enriching the fuel to fuel fabrication into pellets or focus on heavy water research for heavy water pressurized reactors, developing the initial reactor models, then focusing on the spent fuel, reprocessing the spent fuel, and the entire three-stage nuclear program, which would become the very foundation of our nuclear policy. This included focus on basic research and development in the nuclear domain, including plutonium research, fuel reprocessing, and waste management of nuclear fuel. So, all the aspects of the fuel cycle and the entire nuclear supply chain was prioritized, which eventually helped India to become to become essentially self-reliant and focus on indigenous development of these key technologies and materials. Despite India being denied access to these technologies in the later period, eventually India managed to overcome these sanctions, overcome that isolation because of the initial focus on building indigenous supply chains and fuel cycle covering the end to end of the nuclear cycle. So, in this regard, the three-stage nuclear program of India became absolutely critical. And this is the foundation on which today's program has been built upon. See, India has very limited uranium reserves. That is something I'm sure all of you must be aware of. India has very limited uranium reserves, which means if you have to scale up your civilian and as well as weapons program in the future, you need to rely on uranium imports. Now, the problem with naturally occurring uranium is that almost 99% of naturally occurring uranium is made up of uranium 238, which is not fissile enough. Even if you subject it to a fissile reaction or a fission reaction, right, it will not produce a vast number of neutrons, which is required to sustain a self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction. So you need to extract uranium 235, enrich its concentration. Uranium 235's concentration is hardly around 0.7% in naturally occurring uranium. So naturally occurring uranium has to be enriched through the process of uranium enrichment. So through enrichment, you produce low enriched uranium, which has a concentration of roughly 4 to around 7%, which is primarily used for nuclear power generation and other industrial applications of nuclear energy. Then anything above 20% becomes your highly enriched uranium. 20% and above enrichment uranium is called highly enriched uranium. But for weapons, you need at least 90% enriched uranium, which is weapons grade uranium. So when you look at the nuclear weapon states, they would have essentially enriched uranium to low enriched state, which is below 20%. For power production, you need enrichment in the range of 4 to 7%, which is more than enough. right? And then at least 20% and above enriched is required to pursue the development of weapons grade uranium, which currently Iran has been trying to do, right? And from 20% to 90%, it's actually a very short process. From here, you can easily scale up the enrichment and very quickly obtain enough weapons grade uranium through which you can make at least a few nuclear warheads. So that is the reason why across the world there is a lot of pressure on civilian nuclear program, because the same technology could be easily diverted towards a weapons program. Once you build the foundation of your civilian program, achieve highly enriched uranium of, let's say, 20%, from here it is just a short step moving towards weapons grade uranium. And if a country can build the delivery systems, the warheads, and fusing the core with the delivery systems, and establishes a proper command structure, a country can easily turn a civilian program into a weapons program with the right focus and investments. So when it comes to India, we have limited uranium reserves. So Homi Bhabha's vision, which was built on self-reliance, it was essentially designed to handle this shortage of the nuclear material. Because see, India has massive reserves of thorium present in the monzite sands of coastal India from Kerala to Odisha. But to utilize the vast reserves of thorium that we have, you need sufficient quantities of fissile uranium and plutonium. So a three-stage program helps India to eventually utilize the vast reserves of thorium deposits that are found in the coastal belt of India. So in stage one, pressurized heavy reactors were focused upon, where naturally occurring uranium is enriched, subjected to a fission reaction to produce plutonium as the output. Now this becomes the fuel for the second stage. And the second stage, built on fast breeder reactors, which was recently operationalized at Kalpakkam, it provides more fuel than it consumes, which eventually powers the thorium cycle of stage 3, thus creating a self sustaining cycle where India's import dependency can be reduced and contained. This doesn't mean India's import dependency will completely come to an end. You will require uranium imports for your first and second stage, but eventually it will help you achieve self reliance by graduating to the third stage. So it has taken so many decades of effort for India to first pioneer the stage one of the program with pressurized heavy water reactors. And now we are making an entry into fast breeder reactors, which has recently gone critical at Kalpak. So it might take many more years and few more decades as well by the time India reaches stage three. And until then, you need sustained uranium imports into the country. That explains why India is entering into so many civil nuclear agreements with countries like Kazakhstan, Canada, Australia, Namibia, because all these countries have vast uranium deposits and they are some of the largest producers and exporters of uranium. So, over the last 2 decades, starting with Prime Minister Manmohan Singh to the current Modi government, India has struck multiple uranium deals and civil nuclear agreements with all these major countries. And that helps India to secure access to reliable supplies of uranium to power the first and second stage, which could help India eventually to graduate to the third stage, where we can depend on our vast thorium deposits. So this grand strategic vision was laid down by Homi Jahangir Baba, which is essentially built on India eventually becoming self-reliant in the nuclear domain. So until 1950s, after a lot of tug and war between the Prime Minister and Homi Baba and the nuclear establishment, India's focus initially remained just on the civilian program, with no clear focus on weapons development program. But the biggest shock for India, the setback, came in 1962. The India-China war and the massive defeat, which had a psychological blow on India, made India realize the value of building nuclear deterrence, and especially after China tested its first nuclear weapons in 1964, just 2 years after the 62 war at Lopnor. India was absolutely shocked, and it became a necessity for India from that point to create a strategic deterrence, a nuclear deterrence, in order to deter any possible Chinese threat. As the border dispute continued, and as tensions prevailed with China, with frequent incursions taking place, frequent clashes occurring even in 1967, India started shifting towards a weapons program as well. It essentially brought out that ambiguity in its policy, the ambiguity in its nuclear policy, where we kept on promoting civilian technology, global disarmament, while parallelly and secretly pursuing a weapons program by diverting civilian technology towards the weapons program. So in the 1960s and 70s, that's where India made that strategic shift, a paradigm shift. Initially, our focus was just nuclear technological development and giving a global push for disarmament to end the nuclear arms race during the Cold War. But as China tested its weapons, following India's massive defeat in the 62 war, the focus now shifted towards development of civilian technology along with focus on the military weapons program with the intention of creating nuclear deterrence against China. Because by 1970s, especially after the 71 war, Pakistan also accelerated its nuclear weapons program with direct Chinese support. And this gave a further push for India's weapons program to not only counter the Chinese nuclear program, but as well as the Pakistani nuclear weapons program. And the China Pakistan nexus, which we studied in our previous classes, was also posing a serious threat for India's strategic and security calculations. So, this is where we witnessed a complete shift in India's nuclear approach, and it becomes a critical geopolitical turning point. So, under Lal Bahadur Shastri, India adopted a very cautious approach of ambiguity. India neither rejected the path of nuclear weapons, because by then we had suffered a crushing defeat with China, and China had tested its weapons by 1964. So, given the circumstances, Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri focused on a very ambiguous policy where India was giving a push for its weapons program largely in a secretive manner, making few statements as well, which was not well received by the global community. It had triggered a lot of global paranoia and anxiety that India might now accelerate its weapons program. At the same time, Lal Bahadur Shastri adopted a very cautious approach, focusing on the existing civilian program and the push being given for global disarmament. But this ambiguous approach of India that we got to see from 1960s had already put global powers on the edge, especially US and China were closely watching India's nuclear program. And the US was already angry with India that it had diverted its civilian program towards nuclear weapons research, especially the Canadian reactor, right? And some of the material that US had supplied had been diverted towards weapons technology. And that is something the US was already furious about. So when you look at the initial hesitation from the administration of Lal Bahadur Shastri, it was driven by a number of factors. One, of course, was the financial constraint. This was the era where India was still struggling with lack of industrialization, poverty, lack of food security as well. So financially, this would be a very resource intensive project. So the financial constraints accompanied with India's principled commitment to global disarmament created a challenge for India. At the same time, the threats being posed by China and Pakistan and the nexus between them and the pressure strategy of the United States against India was also pushing India towards considering a weapons program, leading to this ambiguous approach, a position of deliberate ambiguity that was being maintained. But then came the biggest shock, back to back shocks in January 1996, one of the most devastating months for India. Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri, as we have discussed under India Pakistan wars, following the 1965 conflict, was in Tashkent, which is in present day Uzbekistan. Back then it was in Soviet Union, with USSR acting as a mediator following the 65 war. The Tashkent agreement was worked out, and the very next day, Lal Bahadur Shastri passed away in Tashkent, raising serious concerns and questions and conspiracy theories as well. And within 13 days, on 24th January, India's leading nuclear scientist, Homi Bhabha, passed away in an air crash in the French Alps. The plane he was traveling crashed in the French Alps, killing Homi Jahangir Bhabha. So these two back-to-back deaths that occurred in just a span of 2 weeks. On 11th January, Lal Bahadur Shastri passed away, and 24th Jan, Homi Jahangir Bhabha passed away. So this was a massive setback to India's nuclear program. Not just the weapons program, but the civilian program as well. In fact, the Prime Minister back then, Indira Gandhi, who had taken over from Lal Bahadur Shastri, made a very important remark at that point. She called out that these two deaths are probably the biggest setbacks that modern India had seen at that point. So post the death of Homi Bhabha, the leadership of India's nuclear program passed on to Dr. Raja Ramanna, another key figure in India's nuclear program, who went on to eventually champion India's weapons program. A student of Homi Bhabha, a big admirer of Homi Bhabha as well, and his entire initial team that Homi Bhabha had built, along with the space program that was parallelly accelerating under Vikram Sarabhai, right, went on to establish the weapons program, including the delivery systems, primarily the ballistic missile program that took off later in 1980s. So these two deaths that occurred back to back came as a big setback for India. Though there are a lot of wild conspiracy theories surrounding it, it's not required for us to get into it from an examination point of view. Though there are sufficient investigative reports, there have been articles, books written about it. Even a former CIA officer who claims that the CIA was probably involved in the assassination of both Shastri and Homi Bhabha. It's better we don't get into the conspiracy theories, as nothing can be established conclusively. There's very little that we know as to what exactly happened. But indeed, the back to back deaths did come as a big setback for India, as remarked by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. But this strengthened India's resolve. Now it was very, very clear for India's strategic establishment that pursuing the weapons path was non negotiable for India. Given that China had now become nuclear armed, given that Pakistan was accelerating its nuclear program with focus on weapons research, and given the strategic nexus between them, and especially from 1969 to 71, the hostility of United States under Nixon and Kissinger during the liberation of Bangladesh war, the deployment of the US naval fleet, the USS Enterprise, into Bay of Bengal, issuing an open threat to India, US aligning with Pakistan during the Bengali genocide, made it very clear for India that the choice was very simple, that India can never give up nuclear weapons and the pursuit of a weapons program. It became essential, a strategic necessity, to overcome all the diplomatic barriers that were being set up at that point. Because, see, right after China tested nuclear weapons in 1964, the global community, especially the permanent members, they got together to establish the NPT regime, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, brought out for signature in 1968, and eventually it took effect from 1970. Now, when you look at the NPT regime that was created in the late 60s, it was designed to keep out countries like India and others from ever pursuing nuclear weapons. It was inherently discriminatory in nature. That's the reason why India outright rejected the NPT. When you look at the provisions of NPT, it becomes clear why the treaty is discriminatory and why India rejected the NPT. The NPT only recognizes 5 countries as official nuclear weapon states. These are basically those countries which had already tested and deployed nuclear weapons before January 1st, 1967, a random cutoff date, which was designed to benefit the P5 countries, the 5 permanent members of UN Security Council, that is US, Soviet Union, UK, France, and China. So these 5 countries would get to retain their nuclear arsenal. They could further develop it, modernize it. Whereas all the other countries, the non-NPT states, if they were to sign the treaty, they will give a commitment, a binding commitment, that they would never seek the pursuit of nuclear weapons. If they already had a weapons program, they had to shut it down. And in return, the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, which was set up in 1957, would assist in the peaceful development of nuclear technology by sharing civilian technology with other countries. So almost 191 countries became signatories to the NPT. Right? It's one of the most universally accepted treaties today, as many countries are committed to the goal of a nuclear free world. But few countries like India, for example, Pakistan, Israel, they wanted to retain the option of developing nuclear weapons for strategic reasons. For India, it was about China and United States primarily. It was a matter of deterrence for India against big global powers, which otherwise could bully India and blackmail and threaten India. So if India pursues the path, then it's a chain reaction. Pakistan would seek the same. in order to maintain that balance of power vis-a-vis India. Then Israel also rejected the NPT, deciding to keep the option of developing nuclear weapons. So it's widely believed, it's like an open secret, that Israel has developed and deployed nuclear weapons, just like India and Pakistan. And these three countries are outside the NPT. Now, did you know that there are two more countries which are outside the NPT? Can you find out which are those two countries and why they are not part of NPT? Can you mention that in the comments below? Under NPT, only P5 countries are allowed to retain their nuclear arsenal. They can develop it, modernize it, right? They are the official nuclear weapon states, whereas all the other non-nuclear weapon states have to basically disarm and commit that they will never seek the manufacturing and development of nuclear weapons. So India, Pakistan, Israel have rejected it. They have deliberately not signed it. Why? Because they want to retain the option of developing nuclear weapons. For India, it was discriminatory, right? It was creating a world of haves and have-nots. So on strategic grounds, on security grounds, these three countries have deliberately not signed the NPT. Now there are two more countries which are outside NPT. Can you find out which are those two countries? Mention the names of the countries below and why they are not part of NPT today. Please mention that in the comments. Now, as India stayed out of NPT and as Chinese threat kept increasing, the American threat kept on increasing, Pakistan was now accelerating its program with Chinese assistance. India accelerated its own weapons program, largely built covertly. According to reports, there was an element of Soviet support and assistance. China was actively leaking nuclear materials, secrets, and plans to Pakistan to aid its nuclear weapons research. Reportedly, India also received some covert support, some form of covert backing from the Soviet Union. But India's program was largely indigenous. In 1974 May, India carried out the historic Pokhran 1 test, codenamed Operation Smiling Buddha, as it was carried out on Buddha Purnima. So Dr. Raja Ramanna and the initial team of scientists at Department of Atomic Energy, BARC, and other key institutions, they played a pivotal role in the first ever nuclear test that was carried out. And India termed it a peaceful nuclear explosion. Right? It's like oxymoron. You can't have the word peaceful going together with nuclear tests. So India, when it categorized this test as a peaceful nuclear explosion, it raised a lot of global alarm and eyebrows. See, India's objective was very simple, that we are looking not towards a nuclear arms race. We are not looking to threaten someone. For India, this was about achieving deterrence, achieving that balance of power with China, ensuring that India can't be bullied, ensuring that India can stand on its own without being threatened or being pushed around by global powers like China and the United States. In 1970s, India faced a very hostile world, primarily from US and China and Pakistan. Given that three wars had been fought by India in a span of hardly a decade, right? 1962 with China, 65 and 71 with Pakistan. It became a necessity for India to deter these hostile neighbors and global powers like US, which were trying to bully India. So this test became a remarkable step as India emerged as the first country outside the P5 to test nuclear weapons outside of the NPT. So you guys can imagine the global reaction to this. Especially from the Western countries, there was a lot of criticism that was aimed at India. Even China was furious at India's nuclear tests. So this immediately led to a regime of sanctions targeting India's nuclear and technological sector. Readily available technologies and key materials were denied to India for several decades. India was pushed into a period of global isolation. Key technologies and materials, which was essential for even civilian technology, was denied for India, as some of the technologies and materials could have a dual application. It could be diverted towards military and weapons program. So India had to essentially double down on its nuclear goals and commitments. India ignored the global threat, the global pressure, and the criticism. India put up a very brave diplomatic front under Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, braved the hostile world. We faced criticism even from friendly partners as well. Many Asian, African, Latin American countries, close partners like Japan, since they're all committed to nuclear disarmament, they took a strong stand against India's nuclear program. So India had to navigate these difficult circumstances, and India doubled down on its focus on self-reliance. India invested more heavily in domestic uranium enrichment, heavy water technology, domestic reactors, fuel reprocessing, and we even paved the way for a missile development program because eventually you need a delivery platform to deliver the warheads in order to establish your nuclear deterrence. So by 1980s, India had established a structured missile development program, ballistic missile development program, which would become the primary delivery platforms for India's nuclear weapons. So external technology denial basically gave a big push for India's domestic indigenous capability development, be it in missile technology or in nuclear weapons technology. The next period under Morarji Desai is largely forgettable. Morarji Desai has largely been seen as a disastrous prime minister, someone who compromised India's covert operations in Pakistan, someone who put a restraint on India's nuclear weapons pursuit as well. Though our weapons program did not halt, it didn't come to a stop. There was definitely a certain restraint, a political roadblock which had been created, keeping in mind the global circumstances and developments. So during this period, India's nuclear program slowed down to some extent, and there was no active push that was provided. But then the next jump came in 1980s under Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. Rajiv Gandhi followed a mix of policies inspired by Nehru and Indira Gandhi. He pushed the disarmament agenda. India has always been a champion of global disarmament. In 1988, India proposed an action plan for a nuclear weapon free world. It's also popularly known as the Rajiv Gandhi Action Plan. India proposed this action plan at the United Nations, and India has been rallying for global support to push the world towards global, fair, and equitable disarmament. At the same time, Rajiv Gandhi accelerated India's covert nuclear program along with a structured missile development program. Under the leadership of Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, the DRDO was authorized by the Prime Minister to launch an integrated guided missile development program that laid the foundation of our ballistic missile program. The Prithvi series of missiles, the Agni series of missiles, which would become our primary land based delivery systems, got a major push, which yielded results a couple of decades later. By late 90s and early 2000s, India's missile program was reaching a mature stage. And now, in the last 2 decades, India's guided missile development program has achieved a very high level of maturity, with India developing even ICBM capabilities and MIRV capabilities, thus establishing credible delivery platforms where nuclear missiles can be delivered, nuclear warheads can be delivered through land based launch platforms. So, this period saw a considerable acceleration of India's nuclear weapons program and as well as the delivery systems as well, primarily through covert methods. Then came the most underwritten, undervalued contribution of Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao in the 1990s. P.V. Narasimha Rao not only continued the push for nuclear weapons and the delivery systems, but also authorized the first major test after 1974. In 1995, India had begun preparations for a full fledged nuclear test with more advanced thermonuclear weapons. And the site at Pokhran was being prepared for a large scale underground test before it was detected by the American intelligence. The CIA and the National Security Agency of the US, they managed to pick up intelligence on India's preparation that was going on at Pokhran, and they brought tremendous pressure on India to abandon the test at the last minute. But this paved the way for India to learn lessons. It allowed the Indian strategic establishment and intelligence agencies to learn about American intelligence gathering efforts, primarily their satellite based intelligence gathering, and even the human sources that they had cultivated. And next time, when India started making preparations in 1998 under Prime Minister Vajpayee, those mistakes were very smartly avoided by India without giving any notice or alert to the Americans to exert that pressure. So if Pokhran 2 could succeed, the lessons of 1995, the failure in conducting the test because of American pressure, played a very important role. It is believed that the United States, which showed the satellite pictures asking questions from India as to what India was doing at Pokhran, those images played a very vital role to help the Indian establishment understand as to how exactly Americans were tracking India's preparedness. And next time, India managed to avoid those very same mistakes and executed a flawless covert nuclear test at Pokhran 2 in 1998 under Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Now, before India's second successful nuclear test, another global framework was created to add a new restriction, the CTBT, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, which proposed a moratorium and an eventual prohibition on further testing of nuclear weapons. It was brought out in 1996 through the Conference on Disarmament, which is guided under the United Nations. But however, the CTBT has never come into effect because it has not received the ratification by the required minimum number of members, especially the nuclear weapon states, right? States which have nuclear capability, they are required to sign and ratify the CTBT. There are different annexures which are maintained under which the countries are categorized. So countries with existing nuclear weapons, countries with potential nuclear capabilities, they are under a particular annexure. And all those nations have to mandatorily sign and ratify CTBT for it to come into effect. But since it has not received that support, CTBT has never come into effect. So India is firmly against the CTBT. India has not signed the CTBT, just like we have rejected the NPT, because India would like to retain the option to test nuclear weapons someday if required, right? Though after 98, India has never tested nuclear weapons again, but India would like to retain the option if at all the need arises. So as a result, India has opposed the CTBT, and today, under CTBT, there is a global organization, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization, which has deployed a global network of sensors and monitoring systems in order to detect any covert nuclear test that a country might conduct. See, nuclear tests can be conducted underground, or it can be conducted in the atmosphere, or even underwater, right? So, CTBTO, which is responsible to enforce this proposed treaty, it maintains a global network of sensors and monitoring stations with the ability to detect any kind of nuclear test. It maintains a global network of seismic stations to pick up the slight trembling in the Earth's crust, which is introduced during underground nuclear explosions. It maintains a global network of hydrophones, which picks up the acoustic signature in seas and oceans if an underwater nuclear test is conducted. It also has access to a global satellite network to pick up any radiation that could be released during a nuclear test. So through such a global network, CTBTO works closely with United Nations and IAEA to detect any nuclear test which is conducted by any power across the world. So post 1998, there's only one country which has carried out nuclear tests, which is North Korea, right? Uh, India, Pakistan carried out back-to-back tests in 1998. Pakistan immediately retaliated after India's nuclear test at Pokhran. And after that, there has been a general moratorium, a self-imposed moratorium, where none of the nuclear powers have actually conducted a physical test except for North Korea. So please make a note of those countries which are actually staying out of CTBT. These are the countries which have to sign and ratify it if the CTBT has to come into force. So this is an important topic for your prelims. India, Pakistan, North Korea have never signed it, which means they want to retain the option to test their nuclear weapons. US, China, even Iran, Israel, and Egypt, they have signed, but they have not ratified it. And without their ratification, the treaty will not go into effect. And recently, Russia has revoked its ratification in 2023 following the Ukraine war and the Western sanctions against Russia. This has been Russia's retaliation against the West. That's why it is a recent development, and you can expect questions on CTBT and India's position on CTBT. Russia in 2023 has essentially ended its so-called moratorium and it has revoked its ratification, following which United States also has revoked its moratorium on nuclear testing. Under Donald Trump, the US administration has essentially authorized further nuclear tests if required. So this raises the possibility of a fresh nuclear arms race that could potentially break out. There are reports that China, Pakistan have often conducted secret underground tests, though it has not been verified and confirmed. There are reports that even US and Russia have conducted secret tests without uh, the world knowing about it. But as far as public knowledge is concerned, the last known nuclear test was by North Korea, right? And that is after the test of India and Pakistan back in 1998. So CTBT remains a very important topic. And please remember these countries which have signed it but not ratified it. Country which has revoked its ratification, that is Russia. Countries like India, Pakistan, North Korea, which have never signed it. Now, coming to the Vajpayee era, the critical turning point where the historical decision was made to ensure that India could successfully test its nuclear weapons by not repeating the mistakes of 1995. India ensured that several measures were taken to basically evade American surveillance and intelligence gathering efforts. The US was maintaining a heightened alert, keeping a regular watch on Pokhran, which is India's test site for nuclear weapons in Rajasthan. Constant American satellite presence was always noticed about the Pokhran site. Plus, the US was always trying to cultivate human sources within the Indian government and the scientific establishment. So, a lot of precautions had to be taken to evade the American intelligence gathering efforts, from reshaping the sand dunes to ensuring that the presence of scientists was not noted, right? By using various covert tactics, which was under the RAW's protection, research and analysis wing, was given the mandate to secure the secrecy of India's nuclear program. So a number of covert methods were involved to move the warheads, to position them, and even detonate them eventually. From 11th to 13th May, 5 underground tests were carried out. And the world realized only after the explosions had been carried out. So this had basically hoodwinked the Americans. The Americans were shocked, surprised, and even till date, it remains one of the biggest intelligence failures of the CIA. Their inability to detect and preempt the Indian nuclear tests remains one of their biggest intelligence failures. So the credit for pushing India onto the nuclear path definitely rests with Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, with the contribution of the previous administrations and the leadership, starting right from Nehru all the way till PV Narasimha Rao. Right, all the decisions eventually paved the way for the tests that were carried out under Operation Shakti. So now India had officially emerged as a nuclear weapon state. But again, you can imagine the global reaction to this. Right, the world was not happy with it. So there was tremendous criticism against India's nuclear tests, from US to China to even Japan. Because see, Japan is the only country which has suffered the horrors of a nuclear detonation. So Japan is strongly committed to non-proliferation treaty. And since India is not a signatory to NPT and India carried out the nuclear tests, Japan also isolated India. In fact, most of the global powers, from Australia, New Zealand to South Africa to Brazil, right? Several countries which are committed to a nuclear free world, even ASEAN nations, for example, African countries, they all have declared regional nuclear weapon free zone under their respective treaties. So they all opposed India's nuclear tests, put a lot of pressure on India. Economic and technological sanctions were intensified. So this led to a period of isolation again. Pakistan followed it up with a back to back nuclear test that heightened the arms race and basically turned the balance of power in the entire South Asia region. If India attained nuclear deterrence against China, immediately Pakistan attained nuclear deterrence against India. It's under this nuclear umbrella that Pakistan could now step up its covert proxy war, use terrorism against India more frequently, with guarantee that India would not dare to attack Pakistan with conventional methods. And that became a new shield for Pakistan to further intensify its covert warfare against India. So during this difficult period, where India was facing a lot of criticism, a lot of questions were raised about India's credibility, India was often being equated with Pakistan. Now, this is where I want you to know that Pakistan's nuclear program has been nothing short of a rogue state. It not only received backing from China, where China leaked nuclear material and the plans and the designs, including its ballistic missiles, the Americans essentially blessed it, though they knew China was violating the NPT. Though they knew China was proliferating nuclear technology into the hands of Pakistan, the Americans turned a blind eye, which again shows their hypocrisy, because they believed a nuclear Pakistan would be a good counter to India, which had aligned with the Soviet Union. So that was a difficult geopolitical circumstance that existed, where China was actively helping Pakistan and the Americans were willing to allow this to happen. And Pakistan ended up proliferating the same nuclear secrets and material to other rogue actors like Iran, North Korea, Libya, and the others. A.Q. Khan, who's considered as the father of Pakistan's nuclear program, ended up being a ringleader of a nuclear mafia, a cartel, which was basically smuggling nuclear material and technology to other rogue states such as Iran, North Korea, and Libya. Whereas when you compare this with India, India has largely maintained a clean track record. As a responsible nuclear state, India has ensured the integrity and the safety of its nuclear program, whereas our neighbor Pakistan has blatantly proliferated nuclear technology, raising a big risk of nuclear material and technology falling into the wrong hands. In fact, the biggest nightmare for the entire global community is Pakistan as a state collapsing and its nuclear technology and weapons falling into the wrong hands, including the hands of terrorists. Given the fact that there are radicalized elements within the Pakistani army, the Navy and Air Force, and the ISI, if at all the Pakistani state were to collapse, right, that would be an absolute nightmare for every nation, including India. So that's a worst case scenario that no country wishes, because Pakistan's nuclear arsenal is probably the most vulnerable. If the state were to collapse, if the deep state were to lose control, what would happen to its nuclear weapons? Would terror groups gain control over it? And if yes, that would be the biggest dangerous situation, especially for India and every other country. So, given all these circumstances, India wanted to distinguish itself from Pakistan as a responsible nuclear state. So, the Vajpayee government introduced the Nuclear Doctrine, which was formalized by 2003 with a clear command structure to ensure that the civilian government maintains complete control over India's nuclear arsenal and the delivery choices. So, India has initiated a few policies under the No First doctrine, right? As part of the nuclear doctrine, no first use is one of the key policy doctrines that India has pushed for, which means India will never be the first country to use nuclear weapons, which also means India will never use nuclear weapons against non nuclear weapon states. So, when you declare a no first use policy, this potentially opens up India to a first attack, right? Then, what is the whole purpose of your nuclear weapons program? This is where India establishes credible minimum deterrence. See, it is true that nuclear weapons have been probably one of the biggest um, contributors with regard to global peace. As I said, it sounds like an oxymoron to use the word peace and nuclear weapons together. But since the Cold War, the reason why bigger conflicts have been avoided, a World War III has been avoided, is because nuclear armed nations, they create a deterrence against each other, which makes the first strike super costly, right? And it is simply unsustainable for any country to think of a bigger conflict with potential nuclear consequences. So it acts as an automatic deterrent against conflict between two big nuclear armed states. Reason why US Soviet Union have never fought a direct war, or US Russia have never fought a direct war, or US China have never fought a direct war, is largely due to nuclear weapons, because it creates the deterrent effect. So if you can ensure credible minimum deterrence and a guaranteed massive devastating second strike, that is probably the biggest harbinger of peace. And that's exactly what India has tried to implement. So if you have to prevent a first strike, since you have a no first use policy as a responsible nation, the first priority here is to avoid the first strike, right? In case of a hypothetical nuclear war game scenario, let's say Pakistan or China, in case of a conflict with India, are thinking of the nuclear option. They would go after India's nuclear launch systems, be it the land based arsenal, the air based delivery systems, and the underwater delivery systems. So, in case of such a scenario, war gaming has suggested that land and air based platforms can always be identified and neutralized in the first strike. Your ballistic missiles and other guided missiles, including cruise missiles, which are nuclear capable, though they can be kept mobile, they can be placed underground in silos, or you can mount them on trucks and rail and keep them moving around. The enemy can always pick up the location through better intelligence, and they can potentially wipe out your entire arsenal of ballistic and cruise missiles. When you look at air based launch options, primarily your fighter jets, which are nuclear capable, In the case of India, it would be the Sukhoi 30, the Rafales, Jaguars, Mirage. So these fighter jets, which are deployed at air bases, can also be picked up. The locations can be targeted, and your air base delivery option could also be taken out in the first strike. So, what can potentially survive a first strike is underwater SSBNs, nuclear powered submarines carrying nuclear ballistic missiles on board, and that completes your nuclear triad status. So, India has achieved this with the INS Arihant class of submarines. India has already deployed three of them: Aridaman, Arigat, and there's a fourth one in the line under the Arihant class. So, nuclear powered submarines have a heightened capability to remain underwater for months together because they have no limitation on fuel. A regular conventional submarine, like diesel electric submarines, they have to frequently come to the surface to take in fresh oxygen, to recharge the batteries, increasing the chances of their detection. Whereas SSBN, which is powered by a nuclear modular reactor, it can remain submerged for months together. The only limitation is the fatigue of the crew and the supplies. If this can be ensured, SSBN can remain underwater for more than 6 months easily, and you can dispatch it far away from the mainland into, let's say, deeper waters. Keep it hidden for a very long time from the enemy, thus increasing the chances of their survivability. And if they are equipped with long range ballistic missiles like India's K5 and the K15 under the Sagarika series, if they have sufficient range, right? If it's a medium range or long range, even ICBM range missiles, it can easily be used to deliver a credible minimum second strike. If you can guarantee a devastating second strike, that will automatically deter the enemy from launching the first strike. So that is the whole doctrine that India has built. India commits to a no first use policy, which means we will not be the first to use nuclear weapons. We will not use it against non nuclear weapon states, right? We will only use it in retaliation against a nuclear strike. So, for that, you need to establish credible minimum deterrence. And for that, you require a nuclear triad status with a proven capability that you have the ability to launch nuclear weapons from land, air, and underwater. You need to guarantee to the enemy that your nuclear delivery systems, your command structure can survive a first strike. And you can guarantee a devastating second strike. That is when deterrence can be achieved in the nuclear domain. And today, India's nuclear program has really matured to this particular stage. When you look at the command structure, there is firm civilian control on India's nuclear weapons. That's how it should be in a democracy. See, Pakistan has deliberately maintained an ambiguity. It has no clear nuclear doctrine, no clear command structure, though it claims that its nuclear decision making is under civilian control. The reality is that it is basically controlled by the deep state. Right? Eventually, Pakistan's nuclear decision is left with the army chief. That's a well-known open secret. That's not the case with India. In case of India's nuclear command structure, there are established institutions. A robust, redundant architecture has been built. We have a political council, which is nothing but the Cabinet Committee on Security. So it is chaired by the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister of India holds the nuclear buttons, the nuclear launch codes. The Prime Minister would be aided, advised by the political members of the political council. And the composition is the same as the Cabinet Committee on Security. So it includes the top cabinet ministers, the Defense Minister, Home Minister, Finance Minister, and the External Affairs Minister. The political council is aided and advised by an executive council, which is chaired by the National Security Advisor. The NSA, who acts as the right hand man of the PM on foreign policy security matters, will chair and head the executive council. And the NSA is assisted by a host of officials, including the three service chiefs of Army, Navy, Air Force, the chiefs of ISRO and DRDO and Department of Atomic Energy, the chief of defense staff, which is a newly created position, the chiefs of intelligence agencies like IB and RAW. So all the top officials, including the top secretaries, the defense secretary, finance secretary, home secretary, foreign secretary, the cabinet secretary as well, of course, the highest ranking civil servant, right? And as well as the secretary to the prime minister's office, the principal secretary to the PM. They're all part of the executive council, assisting and aiding and advising the political council. And if at all a decision is made to launch nuclear attacks if India were to retaliate. The decisions are executed by a dedicated tri-service command, an integrated tri-service command known as the Strategic Forces Command, or the SFC, which is headed by a high-ranking commander. This position rotates between Army, Navy, and Air Force. And now the CDS exercises overall control, command and control over the SFC. So all the nuclear assets of India are under the operational control of the Strategic Forces Command, be it the ballistic and cruise missiles that are nuclear capable, be it a few set of fighter jets like Sukhoi, Jaguar, Mirage, and the Rafales, and as well as the Arihant class of submarines, which are SSBNs. So all these nuclear assets, including the warheads and the delivery systems, are under the command of the SFC. So they will blindly execute the orders received from the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister has the sole authority. Let's say hypothetically, Executive Council is calling for a nuclear retaliatory strike. All members of political council agree and advise the PM to launch a nuclear retaliatory strike. But the PM can go against everyone. Eventually, it is the Prime Minister of India, the elected civilian leader, who gets to decide whether India will opt for a nuclear retaliation or not. Is that clear? So once the orders are issued through a well-established command and control structure, the orders are blindly executed by the SFC. So no one else has discretion. It's only the PM who gets to decide whether India would go nuclear or not. So this is a well-established nuclear command structure, very transparent to the world as well. And we have accounted for all possible scenarios as well. What if the leadership is taken out? Right? This is an eventual scenario that you have to deal with in a war-like environment, like how Iran's leadership was taken out. A decapitating strike is what countries look for to take out the leadership itself. So in that case, a chain of succession has been pre-decided with sufficient nuclear bunkers available, primarily in Delhi, to secure the political executive council, with distributed SFC assets across the country, so that some of the assets can survive, the communication networks can survive, and the leadership can survive. If at all leadership gets taken out, there is a chain of succession which kicks into action. So a redundant, fail-proof nuclear command structure has been established. It has been put through multiple mock drills, providing India with a robust nuclear command and control structure. So when you look at the recent developments, today India has emerged as a mature nuclear state. India has moved away from the sanctions era. Right after 2001-2002 period, our ties with Japan got repaired, ties with US got improved. As US invaded Afghanistan, they needed a key counter-terrorism partner. They realized they couldn't trust Pakistan anymore. So India's relations with US started improving under Prime Minister Vajpayee. Ties with China had started improving. Ties with Japan started improving. So Prime Minister Manmohan Singh built upon this foundation and took one of the biggest political gambles in Indian history. Risking the very survival of his government, he pursued a civil nuclear deal with the US. The very same US which had been hostile to our nuclear program, tried targeting and derailing our program in the past, was now seeking a deal with India. And India secured the 123 agreement. The framework was signed in 2005 with the final implementation of this agreement in 2008. With this, India opened up to IAEA inspections. India signed the safeguards agreement to abide by IAEA standards. We separated our military and civilian program, opening up the civilian facilities for IAEA inspections while protecting the military sites and military installations. So India's military nuclear sites are not open for global inspections, but the civilian facilities have been opened up for IAEA inspections. So following this, the US granted India with the NSG waiver. It gave an exemption to India with regard to the nuclear suppliers group. The nuclear suppliers group, created in 1974, was a direct counter to India's first nuclear test, the Pokhran 1 test. In order to restrict the export of nuclear material and technology, the global community led by US had created NSG as an export control regime. See, I told you that India had largely diverted civilian nuclear material and technology received from Canada and US to build our initial weapons program in the 60s and 70s. So the Canadians and Americans were furious that India had so easily diverted civilian technology and material towards a weapons program. So they immediately created an export control regime by establishing the Nuclear Suppliers Group. And the condition to join NSG is that you must have signed the NPT. Only signatories to NPT can join Nuclear Suppliers Group. So since India has rejected NPT, India could have never been admitted to the Nuclear Suppliers Group. And if you have to emerge as a major player in nuclear commerce to export and import nuclear material and technology, you must be a member of NSG. It essentially restricts the export, creating a licensing mechanism, and only 48 countries, which are part of it, can engage in nuclear commerce, in nuclear trade. India was kept out of the group and other related export control regimes as well. For example, the MTCR, Missile Technology Control Regime, under which key missile and UAV technologies were restricted, especially if it can be used to build a missile or a UAV with a range of more than 300 kilometers, and if it can carry a payload of more than 500 kilograms. Such missile and drone technologies were limited and restricted. That's why India's BrahMos, the range was kept restricted to 290 kilometers, which is a very odd number to have for a missile. That's because BrahMos was a result of a joint collaboration between India and Russia. So if Russia were to help India develop a cruise missile with a range of more than 300 kilometers, then Russia would be violating MTCR, inviting global sanctions against Russia. So that's why the Indian version of BrahMos, the range was restricted to 290 kilometers. This is also the reason why Russia could not transfer cryogenic engine technology to ISRO. Though ISRO was struggling with cryogenic engines and Russia was willing to supply the technology, they couldn't do it because of the restrictions of MTCR. But recently, India joined MTCR in 2016 with American support and support of all the other members, because the US granted an exemption as part of the India-US nuclear deal. The commitment was India would allow American nuclear companies to set up their reactors in India. So US companies like General Electric, Westinghouse, they could sell their reactors to India, set up their reactors in the country, creating an opportunity for American nuclear companies. In return, US will help India to enter all the export control regimes one by one. And this can be done without India signing NPT. India is the only country to have been granted this exception, which means the US recognizes the responsibility of India's nuclear program, the safety and the clean track record of India's nuclear program. So though India will not sign NPT, US agreed to support India's membership to groups like MTCR, NSG, Australia Group, and even the Wassenaar Arrangement. These are the four major export control regimes. It's like an elite club that had been created to keep out countries like India. So today, we have managed to join MTCR, Australia Group, and Wassenaar Arrangement. In 2018 period, we became members of Wassenaar Arrangement, later Australia Group as well. Australia Group mainly deals with technologies related to chemical and biological intermediaries, which can be turned into chemical biological weapons. Wassenaar Arrangement deals with dual use goods and items, right? Any technology which has a civilian and a military application, which can be used for producing WMDs, weapons of mass destruction. So these technologies were tightly restricted. Now India has become a member of MTCR, even Australia Group and Wassenaar Arrangement, and thus we can access these readily available technologies today. Whereas our entry to NSG is being blocked by one country, that is China. Though all NSG members are supporting India's entry, even Japan, which has historically criticized our nuclear program, which has criticized India not joining NPT, came around and accepted India's clean track record and is now supporting India's entry into Nuclear Suppliers Group without India signing NPT. So all the members have made an exception, but China is resisting and it's creating a blockade. It wants Pakistan to be given the same treatment, which will never happen. As I said, Pakistan's program has been a rogue program. Pakistan has been directly involved in nuclear leakage and nuclear proliferation. So no sane country in the world would support Pakistan's entry into NSG. And that is the excuse China is using to block India's entry into the club. But this deal essentially mainstreamed India's nuclear program. It led to the lifting of all the economic and technological sanctions, and India emerged as a key nuclear player. It allowed India to sign similar deals with other countries. That's how India could sign a civil nuclear agreement with Canada, Australia, Namibia, Kazakhstan, and many other countries. And now we are operationalizing these agreements to secure reliable uranium supplies. So the Modi government has been further mainstreaming India's nuclear program. If you look at the recent budget, there is a clear priority being given to small modular reactors. If you look at the current nuclear policy, primarily through the Shanti Act, India has now aligned with the global liability standards in line with IAEA. See, previously, India's nuclear liability agreement brought out under the then Manmohan Singh government, it was not aligned with IAEA standards. It had provided for higher compensation to be provided through a recourse route where the manufacturer of the reactor could be held liable in case of a nuclear accident to pay for nuclear damages. So this was against the global standards of IAEA. Now, through the Shanti Act, India has aligned with the global standards. India has allowed for private sector participation with even foreign investments into the nuclear sector. On Independence Day, just few days ago, Prime Minister Modi has publicly set the ambitious target of India achieving 100 gigawatts of installed nuclear capacity. And the focus is now on small modular reactors, along with the large nuclear projects which are being driven by the government. So there will be greater private participation, greater foreign participation as well, with the uranium deals probably taking effect soon with Kazakhstan, Canada, and Australia. So if you look at the trajectory of our program from a nuclear pariah, right, to a nuclear state which is globally respected and accepted, India's journey has been a very long, difficult journey. From initially hesitating to develop weapons to eventually prioritizing nuclear weapons under the program and testing them against the wishes of the world, navigating the difficult circumstances, standing up against the biggest powers, including the US, and emerging on top. This has been one of the biggest diplomatic achievements of India. And that's why India's nuclear policy becomes such an important and interesting topic. So I really hope this class has done justice to help you understand this remarkable trajectory of India's nuclear program. If you like the session, do let me know in the comments. Do let me know what you think about this. Do you think India has done the right thing by pursuing such an ambiguous policy initially? Do you think India did the right thing when we basically took on the world by rejecting NPT, rejecting CTBT? And what do you think of the policies of Nehru, Indira Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi, Narasimha Rao, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, Manmohan Singh? How it has shaped India's approach towards nuclear technology? Please let me know your views in the comments. Let's have a lively debate on this. I'll look at the comments. I'll try to reply back to you. And please let me know what are your thoughts about the future of India's nuclear sector. So on this note, I bring this elaborate discussion to an end. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow at the same time. And next we'll discuss the rise of European Union. So till then, take care. Have a good night.